Okay, welcome everyone. I'm very happy to introduce you today to our visiting artist, who is Lisa Soranaka. And she is a sculptural ceramicist currently based in Spokane, Washington, and originally from the Seattle area. She earned her BFA in studio art from Central Washington University in 2009 and her MFA in ceramics from Washington State University in 2013. And she currently teaches at Gonzaga University. So with that, Lisa, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Great, thank you for having me. I am hoping that you can't hear it too loud in the background. So my apologies that my dogs are still kind of barking in the background. I did kick them out of the room, but um, they're quite loud. So that barking that you can hear in the background, that's me. So apologies in advance. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with my slides here. So as she already told you, I'm Lisa Soranaka. And hold on, there we go. And I just kind of, I'm going to start by talking about kind of some early work and then kind of get into the current pieces that you can see in the show. And for my BFA, things were kind of like a little less focused. I worked with a lot more different kinds of materials. I focused in ceramics, but I was kind of exploring things with wood. I had a lot of pieces that were influenced by the fact, by how I grew up. My dad is from Japan. So we had a lot of kind of that cultural heritage influence. So this is a wood piece. It's like a light sconce. And then the sushi and hot dog has kind of a ridiculous title. It was growing up, I never knew if I should reach for the ketchup or the soy sauce. And that was kind of a piece I did exploring my mixed race identity, kind of about not fitting in and fitting in and how things are kind of complicated when you have a mesh of cultures as you grow up. For anyone. And so I was kind of exploring those, and I started to get into kind of sculptural tiles, uh, bas relief and kind of higher relief. And I started looking a lot at nature. I was interested in flowers. Gardens and flowers and plant life were really important in the kind of Shinto Buddhist traditions that my dad's family had. I've always been interested in the outdoors. I like outdoor spaces. And so starting to kind of explore those and how I could work with them in my art became something that I was interested in. And these are there's a poppy and then a lotus over here. And, some of the flowers I looked at were ones that were maybe more used to in Western culture, and some were stuff that you would find more commonly in Eastern cultures. And then kind of abstracting the forms, cutting into the spaces, creating pieces that could be kind of removed or changed. So this piece, I don't unfortunately have a better image for the scale, but it is, it's like 6 feet wide by like, I want to say like 3.5 feet tall. Maybe 4. And then there's all these little seed pods, which were kind of an amalgam of a lot of different things, but they have little shakers in them. So the idea was that you could kind of pull them out and shake them and they make noise. And I was just kind of playing around with things. And so that was kind of like early work. After I graduated with my BFA, I worked for an artist in Seattle who mostly does public installations. And I got to assist with this project that was really special. This is the Bainbridge Island Japanese Exclusion Memorial. And Bainbridge Island was one of the first spots in Washington that Japanese Americans were taken to internment camps during World War II. And so this memorial is this really big wall that curves back and forth. And they built the wall before they secured uh, Steve Gardner, who's the artist that I work for, before they were able to secure him to make the art. And so he had to, once he took the project, he had to kind of come up with a system to create these big tiles, but also build the curve into them because the wall was already built. So the curvature was already set, where the tiles were going to go in. So that was a really cool experience for me to work with somebody who was working on such a large scale. He had projects all over the place, but this project I got to spend a lot of time on. And then here's some close-ups of just some of the pieces. And my main job was pressing the names into the nameplates. And then I made the textures and things on the nameplates as well. So just kind of watching that level of production. And then he kind of came up with this cool, he built all these arches to make the pieces on. And then he also built clay arches to put in the kilns with his pieces so that, and then he kind of like secured them to each other so that in the kiln, if you don't know much about ceramics, in the kiln, the clay kind of changes because it goes through a lot of physical and chemical changes, so it can warp right in the kiln. So he had to make these things to keep that arch really, what's the word? Really consistent. So that was a really cool experience. And then I started my master's work at WSU. And I got to work with kilns that were bigger than any other kiln that I'd really gotten to work with before. And because I was a graduate assistant, I was kind of like firing all the kilns so I could pretty much make sure that I could put whatever I wanted in the kiln. So that was pretty cool. So I started, and we also had this really great big gallery space that we had our first year shows in. So we had to do a first year show before our thesis. So I still kind of working with those floral forms and the idea of kind of like Asian influence. I started working, playing with the idea of installation. So I made these humongous flower petals and all of these concrete pillars. I was trying to kind of recreate a pond with stepping stones. As you can see, the floor in this gallery is not the best looking floor. So you kind of have to work with what you got. I brought in as many rocks and things as I could to kind of emulate rivers and streams. And then I took these petals and I kind of cascaded them down the wall to emulate sort of like falling leaves or petals. And then the idea here was that everything was kind of sitting on the water. I was looking a lot at Zen garden spaces, uh, different kinds of ponds. I was thinking a lot about ikebana, which is the Japanese art of floral arranging, and thinking about meditative spaces. And then also, one of the important things about Zen garden spaces is the act of actually walking around the space. So the ambulatory aspect of the garden is just as important as the garden itself. So I was also working on directing the path kind of the viewer. So And you had to physically walk through the space to actually view all of the pieces because they were spread out all over the floor. Um, and then for my master's thesis, I started getting really interested in growth patterns. So I was looking at things like barnacles and mushrooms. And actually, the big inspiration for this show was this oyster mushroom, and its scientific name is it's a pleurotus, and then that's like a family of mushrooms, and then it goes like pleurotus um, into different varieties. Um, so I named the body the Pleurotus supplex, which is Latin for essentially the type of mushroom that I was looking at, and then furniture. And I put everything on these pedestals, and I displayed them in a way that I thought kind of turned them into specimens. And I got kind of interested in this old furniture, and a lot of it is kind of dusty and old and antique, and some of it's not in really great shape. And then my thought process was that the growths of the floral fungus like shape um, was kind of in different stages of overtake. So different pieces had kind of were sort of more encompassed than others. And I was kind of exploring this idea of absence and the passage of time, and then also how things the way that we decorate things, so like adornment and things, and how much of that kind of encompasses and overtakes things over time. So those were kind of the ideas that I was looking at. And the furniture, I just felt like was this really great sort of place to put these forms. And so um, and these were because I had these massive kilns, I could make these huge solid pieces. So I was building directly onto the furniture, and then I would cut it in really specific spots, disassemble it, load it up into the kiln in a huge pile of sand to keep, because these are really thin. So it was really easy for them to crush themselves in their own weight before it was fired. So once they got bisque fired, they were pretty strong. But before that, it took a lot of finagling. So having these bigger than a person-sized kilns was really convenient. And I was able to create a lot of these forms in almost one solid piece. And I was also kind of pushing technically, like, how thin can I make the clay? How much can I pull it out? And it involved a lot. I'd like to say it's a more complex process than it is, but really it was just pinching, essentially, like pulling and pinching over and over again. And so, you can see the different furniture pieces kind of arranged. And then I had some smaller pieces in the show too, the tea set over here on the right. And then I graduated with my master's, and immediately had no kilns, no place to work. I started adjuncting at a satellite campus for a community college in Pullman, Spokane Falls Community College. And I was teaching art appreciation. So I effectively stopped making anything for a while, for the most part. I would, like draw here and there or do small things, but really not making much of anything. I was probably a little burnt out too, but an opportunity for a mural came up. And so a friend of mine who I went to school with, we put in a proposal and we decided to paint this big mural. It is, here's another shot of it. It is a 4,000 square foot space. And these are murals basically that the city likes to do to prevent graffiti. And so we kind of came up with this idea to make it kind of like graffiti itself. And keep it kind of also like a drawing. So we didn't fill in any of the spaces. Anyways, and we had a really great time painting it. I don't usually do a ton of painting. I like usually doing a lot more three-dimensional work, ceramicist, sculptor. But it was kind of cool to kind of step outside that boundary and do something else. And also kind of brought me back to when I was working for that artist in Seattle. I really liked doing I really liked helping and work on those public projects. And so then getting to do my own, even though it wasn't in ceramics or sculptural at all, it was still pretty exciting. So, and then here's some more of it. Spokane is also known as the Lilac City. So all these branches are a lilac bush. And then the idea is that all the little critters and things, the sort of like underbelly of a lilac plant. So there's this kind of like pretty thing. And then also these kind of maybe like creepier things or bugs and insects and other little animals living their life. So we had a really good time doing this. And then I was offered a show in Spokane at one of the galleries, and I had to figure out how I was going to make work again because I didn't have a kiln at all. So I was pretty reliant on firing things at places that did have kilns. I started working for Gonzaga at this point. So I had access to a kiln. I was commuting between Pullman and Spokane, which is, it was like an hour and 20 minutes door to door. So I was teaching in both places. It was kind of hectic. So I started thinking about the pieces that I could make and how I could make them more modular. So I started making these individual sort of petally, mushroomy forms and seeing how I could put them together to create those same growth patterns that I was interested in. And I also worked with some smaller pieces, but I really got into these single petals. And I also started thinking about, I was thinking about beauty before and how that can be toxic. And so I started really pushing that idea, thinking about, as a woman, or just even as a person, the pressures of how you're supposed to look, what you're supposed to wear. We all decorate ourselves. We all put clothes on our body. Some of us wear makeup, we do our hair, and like, are you pretty enough or too pretty, thin enough, not thin enough, too thin, all those things that I think a lot of people think about. I was really thinking about all the ways that I internalize that. And so I started thinking about clothes and the body. So I started playing with this idea on these mannequins, these dress forms, and one of the places where I thought there was like a lot of pressure on, especially in those specific areas, was weddings, right? So like women to look beautiful on their wedding day, you're supposed to look really beautiful on your wedding day and all eyes are on you. So I found this like old wedding dress and I started playing with that. And I thought the blue kind of went together with that. So that was kind of exciting to start making new things, but also to figure out how I could do that without this space where I had unfettered access to humongous kilns that I could run 24/7 if I wanted. So, that's like a complicated space to be in right out of school, and figuring all of that out. And then we had this, the Ronald McDonald house. here in Spokane had a call out to do these hearts that they put around town. I decided to mosaic them. I just thought I'd put these in because I thought, you know, they came out pretty nice. And this was, I will say, this is a good lesson to like think about, you know, the projects that you pick. I decided to mosaic these. These are they're like 4 feet wide, but they're also really deep. So you can't really like lift them around. So I had to like tilt this onto a blanket and like drag it around to move it places. It was quite the endeavor. And then I did this blue and red one that's over here on the right. I did that one first, and they asked me to make another one. And I, for some reason, agreed because I was like, yeah, sure, I'm not busy enough. But you know, it's what it is. But they came out really nice, and they were a lot of fun to make. And I got to kind of play with flowers in a more direct way, and so that was pretty fun. And then another friend of mine who I went to school with, Mariah Boyle, we got asked to do some temporary murals kind of earlier last year, when a lot of cities started seeing a lot of protests, and some protests, as many of you know, due to lots of different kinds of conflict, saw some damage to the cities that they were in. So the Spokane Arts organization, they coordinated with businesses who either had windows broken, or they were more vulnerable to have windows broken because they were maybe on protest paths. So we got asked to do this one, and this one was also, this was a quick project. Really, this was, I think, like 3 days of painting. And these are, you can see we're standing in front of it here. So these are pretty big panels. And they were already installed on the window when we painted them. So, so yeah, a lot of time up on the ladder. And we kind of came up with this idea of water. The river is a really big feature here in Spokane. So, I mean, it got kind of wavy. There's also Lake Coeur d'Alene nearby. So we were thinking about like boat wakes and things like that. So we just kind of cranked that out as fast as we could. So that was a fun project. And then these are kind of the stuff that I was looking at when I started thinking about growth. So I was looking at coral, barnacles, the way that different plants in different spaces grew, lichens. So a lot of this is like lichen moss or different kind of fungi. And I was just really interested in the shape that they made, but also the way that they would grow on things. And some things change depending on conditions. So some things grow toward light, some things grow away from light. You know, so the way that they spread, I thought was really fascinating. And then here's that oyster mushroom. And as you can see, it is also pink. So that was, I think, initially where the pink came from. And then there was this old china that also, that was also kind of incorporated to some of the furniture pieces. And I thought that they played off nicely with each other. But yeah, so here's some more pictures of the mushrooms that I was looking at. And I just thought they were so fascinating and so beautiful that they were this mushroom, but they had this really like floral appearance as well. So I thought that was really, really cool. And so it was really this idea of like a fungus and a growth that I was exploring when I started making the shapes. And then here's just some pictures of, as I'm working, so many piles of petals, styrofoam. When I was loading the kiln, the first bisque it was like, I don't know, it was like midnight or something, and I'm loading the kiln, and I stopped. I usually am really careful with these pieces. I like lay them all out. You can the clay can touch each other. The clay pieces can touch each other in the bisque firing, but because they're really thin and they're really easy to break, if you hit them too hard together, they snap little pieces off. If you drop it even from like a little, like half-inch height, it can like snap the whole thing in half. And as I have progressed with this body of work, they've gotten even thinner than they were when I started. So uh, I usually try to be pretty careful with them and kind of like line them up all really nicely. But I started to run out of um, kiln shelves. So, and it was late at night and I just wanted to get everything fired. So I just kind of started like dumping them into the kiln. So I just kind of wanted to show that pile of clay pieces. And then just like different things that I do in preparation for a lot of projects, glaze testing, those sorts of things. Lots of plastic wrap in my life to keep clay wet. um, many textiles, those sorts of things. Um, these are some pictures of a greenhouse and the gardens that are actually in a park that's right up here by my house. It's just a few blocks away. This is obviously in the springtime, not in the winter. Everything is covered in a layer of snow right now, and there's no leaves on any trees. The greenhouse still kind of looks like this because it's a greenhouse, but this Japanese garden over here, I really like to take walks around there. And so just kind of looking at all that, all the like natural spaces. And I'm really lucky to have places like this that are nearby that I can go. And then here's some pieces from the show. And again, I was sticking with that kind of idea of the modular pieces and putting them together to create a larger whole. Um, and I put little, you probably noticed in one of the previous slides, there's little holes in the center of everything. And the little hole is for me to put this, I have these 3-inch long corsage pins. It took me a while to figure out which materials worked best, but I found these 3-inch long corsage pins with a little pearl on the end. And I was on the earlier pieces, I put the hole at the top so that I could sew it on. And then somewhere in there, I determined that the hole was actually better in the middle. So on the bottom right over here, you can actually see there's a piece that has the hole on the top. And then there's pieces that have the pearl in the middle. And so that's just an older petal and a newer petal together. And then I was further exploring that idea um, of this kind of toxic um, beauty ideals, things that, you know, like how far can we go to make ourselves beautiful, or to make things beautiful before it starts to do more harm than good? How much does it overtake? How much does it cloud things? How much does it consume us? Um, and um, because I've looked at historically, like kind of the crazy things that people have done to make themselves more beautiful. There used to be lead in the makeup to make their faces pale, or they would put leeches all over their face. There was all kinds of nasty things like arsenic and lead in clothing dye. And the horrible thing is that, the more that you put on, the worse it made, the more sick it made you, the more pock marks it made in your skin. And so then you would put more on. And so it just made the whole thing worse. So I was just kind of thinking about all of those things when I was making these pieces, that you can have this really beautiful thing that maybe like isn't maybe so good for you, right? Anyway, so just kind of like exploring different patterns of growth. I got really into the ones that are directly onto the mannequin. I felt like I had a lot of space to work with to create those different shapes. So that was a lot of fun. Um, the skirt involves a lot of sewing. So that is, it's a little different process. The mannequins I can kind of pin directly into. So it's a little bit, it's not easier, but it's easier to create the shapes. It's a little more intuitive. I can kind of start placing them and move them around a lot. Whereas on the fabric pieces, you have to like figure out where you want to put it. You sew it on. If you don't like it, you have to cut everything off and start over. So yeah, and again, I was just kind of working on the idea of like different stages of overtake and overgrowth, and then taking kind of inspiration from different garments. So, this one here, everything's kind of focused in the center, like maybe like one of those corsets that goes just around the waist. And then, some of them have more of a dress-like appearance. And then I also started going back to thinking about the space, and how I could make the space the area that's got the growths. Here's those huge styrofoam pieces that you saw in the previous picture, and I started pinning my little small petals into that to create a larger looking piece, and then those will, that's something that I'm hoping to expand on so that I can turn the actual space into the area that is being grown on and overtaken. That's been also really fun to explore. And then these are my dogs that you can kind of hear in the background. And that is my website and my Instagram. And if you'd like to look at anything else, most of my work, the newest work's not up yet on the website, but some of it's on Instagram. And all of my work, except for the very newest, is on the website. So that's my presentation. And then I think it's questions now.